I asked this question to a United States official. What are you doing? How can you possibly back Israel? And the answer was mind-blowing. We did it before. We did it in Iraq, and you all forgot about it. And you'll forget about this too.
The ICC, the ICJ, and international humanitarian law. Are these mechanisms really designed to dispense justice? Or are they in fact systems designed by the elite to give the illusion of justice? To discuss that question, as well as the great work he does at the International Center for Justice for Palestinians, I'm joined today by the director of the ICJP, Tayab Ali. Tayab, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Faris. It's nice to be here.
I'm going to start with a very simple, definitely not contentious question at all.
Right.
International law.
Yes.
Is it really a useful system that works to grant accountability and justice in the world? Or is it in fact a farce, a con, designed by the global elites to make sure that the people, the poor, the downtrodden, the oppressed feel like they've got some recourse, but in fact it just upholds the systems of oppression?
It does feel like the Wild West, doesn't it, when it comes to international law, in that, like in the Wild West, you had various different towns and cities and corporations operating, trying to build a civilization once they've stolen it from American Indians. And what happened in that situation was that the most powerful told everybody else what the law was. And that's how it worked. And so you even had corporations with armies back in that period of time. But eventually, as we progressed, or as America progressed in its construction, its civilization building, laws came in to regulate that. The Constitution was built. People agreed what was right and what was wrong. And now that they built what you would term domestic law. And from that came quite a powerful state, the United States. And, the same as in the United Kingdom, we have rules and laws which are enforced. You can go through a red light, you get 3 points on your license if you're lucky, 6 points if you're not. Speeding on the motorway, 75, 80 miles per hour, you can get pulled over, or a speed camera is going to flash at you. These rules are enforced. You steal something, generally speaking, everybody recognizes that's theft. If the police are informed and they have the time and the resources to arrest you, they'll arrest you. So within our domestic jurisdictions, you have these rules which are properly enforced, and we have that. And then in the same way as law on a domestic level is designed to deal with the interrelation between you and me, people, regular people, you end up with the creation of really powerful states. And international law is designed to deal with those relationships, a relationship between country A and country B, how country A treats the civilians in its own country, but also civilians in country B, and how that interaction works. And your question about whether it's real or is it a farce is, well, what we found was, let's go back to where it came from, where international law really came from. And international law is codified in different ways. It's codified from the United Nations Charter, it's codified by interstate treaties, and it's codified by something called convention. So what do countries generally do? It came, the humanitarian framework came, the modern humanitarian framework that we understand, came really as a result of World War II. And within even World War II, the Allies had war aims. They gave certain rights that they wanted to protect, freedom of religion, freedom of thought. And they had these rights that they fought for. After World War II, we reflected as humanity on what happened in that war. And what happened in that war was tragic. It was devastating. Just some numbers to describe it. 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. 11 million people died at the hands of the Nazis, targeted killings. But the number that really resonates with me is not the 11 million, not the 6 million. It's the total death count in World War II. 75 million people, be they Nazis, be they Russians, be they Europeans, be they Americans, be they Japanese. The point is that we as humanity saw fit to kill 75 million people. That's a phenomenal number. And I remember when I first understood that, I had to check the number over and over again, right? And as nation states, seeing what human beings had done to each other in World War II, we decided to create a system of law and a system of governance. And that led to the Geneva Conventions being developed, that led to international humanitarian law, that led to the conventions on human rights, various ones, European, the International Convention. It also led to, much, much later on, the creation of the International Criminal Court. Now, what we're seeing, and the reason why you asked this question, which you might not have asked 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago, but you're asking it now, is because you're seeing what the ICJ has called a plausible genocide in Gaza. And you're seeing the ICC issue arrest warrants. And you're seeing what, on your phone, on your TV screen, human beings being slaughtered by one of the most powerful armies in the world, backed by the most powerful country in the world, the United States. And you're wondering, why is it that the international law has failed? And what we've learned is the truth of international law, which is that for the last 50 years, it's been used by the West to dominate the rest of the world. It has effectively become a part of Western foreign policy. And so where the United Kingdom or the United States or European countries see a state in the global south, in Africa, in the Far East, in Asia, break this framework of international law, they would use it as a stick to try to get them into order. We can't invest in your countries until you do this. We can't support your infrastructure building until you do this. Because look at these laws and look at how important they are, and you don't abide by them. And that really is why I say it's like the Wild West, because the Western countries were the most powerful states dictating to everybody else what international law was. And for the first time, you get a situation where what Israel is doing with America and the United Kingdom complicit in it, and many European countries complicit in it, is so clearly a breach of international law. I mean, it's so clear that the ICC prosecutor issued arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, but also Palestinian members of Hamas, not to forget that. And the West was like, oh my God, we can't have this, right? This is sort of the emperor having no clothes. Suddenly it's like, no, this is not meant for us. And we have people in the States, politicians, saying this was never meant for us. We have a reaction against the ICC prosecutor personally and his family, and against the institution, where sanctions have been put on him. I mean, you just think about that for a minute, right? He issues arrest warrants because, or the court, should I say, issues arrest warrants because the ICC is living to the Rome Statute mandate, which means that they have to investigate and prosecute suspicion of war crimes. And the United States' response to that is, oh, no, we don't want that to happen, so we're going to sanction you. Not we're going to support you, arrest the suspect, put them on trial with the view that they might be found not guilty. That's too much of a risk for the West. And it's a really important point, if you think about it. There is a fear of this framework that you said is broken, but it exists. And it's a beautiful framework, frankly. International humanitarian law, international law is brilliant. It works fantastically if it's allowed to work, but it's not being allowed to work. If it was being allowed to work, you wouldn't have the genocide continuing in Palestine. You wouldn't have war criminals running around to Hungary, for example, or suspected war criminals running around to Hungary and being protected by Orban. I mean, he's protected a war criminal, as simple as that. You would have these people being brought to justice. So it's not the law that's broken. The law is, in my view, really good, and it works really well. It works really well if it's allowed to. What is broken is the political will behind the law. That's what's broken. And what does that tell you? It tells you that if you want international law to work for you, you have to be a powerful state. You have to be a conniving, powerful state, not just a powerful state. But what does it tell you if you're not a powerful state? If you're not an actor in a powerful state, it tells you that you can't go to a court. You can't go to an international institution. We don't really care about you. In fact, we're prepared to, using Israel's words, eliminate you, carry out crimes against humanity against you, not be held accountable if we're doing that. But where you do it, we'll hold you accountable for the tiniest infraction. You You swear at somebody in that jurisdiction that is from an Israeli background or as a settler, you're going to be arrested and detained. Your building might be destroyed, right? Your home might be destroyed. It tells you that actually you've got to look for another recourse, which is not where I want people to be. It means that you have to take matters into your own hand. Your only answer that you're going to have is to become powerful, is to pick up a weapon and fight back. And international law is designed to prevent that from happening, because that is something that international law is meant to regulate. But you leave people desperate, they'll turn to violence. Human history has shown us that since the beginning of time. When the French were occupied by Nazi Germany, they didn't down tool and go, okay, that's the end of it. The French Revolution pushed back against Nazi Germany. And you see this in I can list example after example after example where law is removed, where accountability is removed, people turn to violence. And the cycle of violence will perpetuate until law is applied equally. So the answer to the very long answer I gave you, which I'm sorry about, is that I don't see the law as improper or dysfunctional or not able to deal with situations. I see the political will is missing, which prevents it from doing what it's supposed to do.
Someone from the global south might hear your answer there and say, it's all well and good that there are some of these great ideals behind international law, but there are certain things which lead them to believe that it's not designed to work in that way. For example, the power of the veto in the UN Security Council, the fact that there's a handful of nations who have so much power, any of them can veto any crucial piece of policy or a draft passed through the UN that could end, suffering and whatnot. And in that same vein, the point you made about stopping people from taking power into their own hands and becoming powerful in order to manipulate international law in their own image or for their own interests, couldn't it also be said that international law prevents people from rising to the heights of the global powers which themselves used means which contravene international law to get there?
I mean, look, there's always going to be we have to be real about how the world works, right? You're never going to get a powerful state ceding all its power into a grouping that might decide to violate its sovereignty, its integrity, its national interests. Why would that happen? I mean, it's also a little bit of a demonstration about when people, democratic states, say that they believe in democracy and democratic values. To what degree? I mean, they clearly don't believe them outside of it. I mean, sometimes you can see they don't believe them within the jurisdiction, let alone outside their jurisdiction. So the United Nations Security Council is not meant to be a democracy. It's not a democracy. You can't have a democracy where you have the power of veto. But how would you get powerful states like China, Russia, and America to sit around a table and say, well, actually, you're going to go with a majority decision? They're all going to be fearful that the minute that other states join together, they're going to be in the minority and they're going to be outvoted. And that could potentially be a different kind of danger for those states. And that's why it's even more important that where you have this framework of international law, international humanitarian law, states that are powerful like the United States, like the United Kingdom, like Germany, like China, like Russia, abide by it. That's the point, because I think you could potentially build in some conditionality into the Security Council power of veto, in that you have to meet a certain standard. It would be a better way of dealing with it. But what's happening at the moment, what we're seeing happen at the moment, is that these states are violating international law and using the Security Council veto to give impunity not just to themselves but to their allies like Israel. And also another sort of farce of the Security Council. I was talking to American diplomats, let's just put it that way, without identifying who they are, because it's not right to do that. And in our conversation about the ceasefire resolutions over the last 18 months, they demonstrated something to me which was quite disturbing, which was that the United Nations Security Council resolutions became a vehicle by which one country would just use a Security Council veto, not to do what was right, but to embarrass another country. So they could never sign up to it. So there'd always be an issue of veto. Oh, look how great I am. I'm agreeing to this resolution. And the other country's like, well, if I do that, it's going to embarrass me, so I can't do it. And it became a game. And so country A would put a resolution forward which couldn't be agreed by country B. Country B put a resolution forward which couldn't be agreed by country A, and you got the veto, and it repeated. But all the while, people were dying on the ground in Gaza. And that's the problem with this. My view of our political class is one, to be fair to them, and this is being fair to them, they're immature. As humanity, we haven't really developed yet enough for us to recognize what's important. But a significant reason for that is that we have ceded power in this world of ours, not really to states, which might not be a problem, but to corporates and to corporate interests. And so you have a few people that are doing exactly what a state would do, which is to protect their own interests. And you have corporations, individual billionaires that are pushing their personal agenda. And, I've stopped believing that this is sort of like a Zionist agenda, an Israeli agenda, a Jewish agenda, a Muslim agenda. I used to think it was of these things in these terms, but it's a power agenda. I think these individuals don't really give a damn about the ideological basis of what they're using. What they see happening when they push countries to have these arguments with each other is a consolidation of wealth in a very small number of people, and that gives them power. And you have that perpetual cycle, and that's what I see happening in the world at the moment. I see people like Elon Musk pretending to be somebody important in terms of good governance in the United States. But look at how he's doing that and what he's using to do that. Look at the Nazi symbolism that's coming through some of his speech, some of his gestures. Whether it is or isn't, I don't really care, but it comes through in that. Look at the remarks he's made about the United Kingdom. Look at the remarks he's made about Muslims and ethnic minorities and migrants. All because he has an ambition to increase his wealth, not because he has a particular ideological view. I mean, if he has a particular ideological view, I think that's based in increasing wealth, frankly, right? And you have that same position across the world. And you get corporates now that are more powerful than states. And we have Apple, we have Meta, we have Elon's empire. We have these Amazon. Some of these Microsoft. Some of these corporates have more money than some countries do, therefore more influence and more power, but no regulation, no accountability in international law. And you're going back to. I'm going back to the basis of your question, which is yes, the Security Council is dysfunctional. Yes, it's used by the powerful states to marginalize the global south. But in the work that I've been doing over the last 2 years, let's say, I've noted that the global south is aware of this. It sees this. Those shackles have been broken. In fact, when I've spoken to diplomats in some global south countries, they've actually used this in those terms. They've said the shackles are being removed now. The blackmail of complying with international humanitarian law through the lens of the West has broken. It's gone. The economic shackles are being removed from us. We're being able to diversify, disinvest from those corporates and those states that are actually using that investment to control us to some degree. You see South Africa initiated the ICJ. Well, they did that for a reason. And it was a good sign to say, look, we're not prepared to play this game anymore. And what I'm seeing and what you're seeing through the BRIC states is an increase in that reluctance to just go along with what the Western states have said for decades as being the right way forward. And I have to say to you, does that mean that I support the global south over the West? It doesn't mean that. It means I support the rule of law and the principles of justice over and above whether it's the global south state, whether it's a Western state, in what they do and how they act and how they build their international relations. And going back to that point about the Security Council, The way to fix that is to create a mechanism that ensures that states within the global south, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's the United States, whether it's England, abide by international law.
A question comes to mind when talking about these shackles coming undone, about things being exposed, which is, why is it that this genocide in Gaza is the reason for the exposing of how self-serving the West is in their usage, and not, for example, the war in Iraq, which killed hundreds of thousands, upwards of 1 million?
Do you remember the war in Iraq? Do you remember the protests on the street? Because there were them. Do you remember the outcry when it became known that the dodgy dossier, the weapons of mass destruction, was a figment of someone's imagination, created in order to justify a war, right? There was an outcry back then. And it's really interesting what you say in that, where you frame that question, because I asked this question to a United States official. I asked this person, what are you doing? How can you possibly back Israel in its attack on Palestinians in this way? And the answer was mind-blowing. We did it before. We did it in Iraq, and you all forgot about it. And you'll forget about this too. That was the answer from the lips of an American diplomat to me about this question. And it's true. You know, we have comfort in this existence we have in the West. We have iPhones, we have nice cars, we have nice houses, we have heating, we have food. You know, we buy food that we know we're not going to even eat. It's just thrown in the bin. We have food bins for that purpose in our recycling households. And so the states know, not the United States, states know the way to keep our people quiet is to make them comfortable, give them just enough for them not to be upset about what's going on. But you can see what's happening in the United Kingdom, in particular in the United States. People are getting fed up. The people are realizing that they're not quite yet working out how and why and what to do about it. But there is a rise of popularist anger. It's being taken out on migrants. It's been taken out on Muslims. Fine, but it's generating. It's being taken out on, the Labour Party come to power with a massive majority, but their poll ratings are so low right now. There's an anger, right? People are recognizing that something is broken, something is wrong. And Gaza is a part of that. I'll tell you that most people, the Israeli lobby will disagree and will shout this down, but most people understand what's happening in Gaza. Most people recognize that the Palestinians are being slaughtered in their tens of thousands without actual good reason. Most people understand that it's not self-defense. Most people disagree with Benjamin Netanyahu's policies. That's a fact. And I haven't polled it, but I can tell you, if you poll it, that's what you'll find. What Israel did is slightly different to what America did in Iraq in this way. America and the United Kingdom does have, to some degree, operational, at least America did have, and we'll see what it looks like in the future, but the UK does have operational accountability systems. So as an example, after the Iraq War, I represented individuals that accused the United Kingdom of war crimes, sued the United Kingdom, and in some instances was successful in that. So that happened. Okay. The United Kingdom investigated its own soldiers, in some instances, for alleged war crimes in Iraq, and there were 25 prosecutions for ancillary offences, and I think 2, from memory, of primary offences. The soldiers got prosecuted. Okay. That's accountability in action, accountability working. Obviously, people want more, but it shows that it does happen. We have currently going on in the United Kingdom a special forces inquiry, allegations about SAS officers in Afghanistan murdering civilians, including women and children. And those allegations were whistleblown by SBS soldiers that didn't agree with what was happening or what they knew was happening, the game that some SAS soldiers were allegedly playing. There's an inquiry going on about that at the moment. And we see and we hear about some of the news from that inquiry, which is devastating, like I said, about children being allegedly killed. That inquiry will result in prosecutions, I'm almost 100% sure, by the nature of what I've seen of some individuals. In my own cases, quite a lot happens in closed, which means that I can't talk about exactly what happened, but I've seen accountability happen in those closed proceedings because I've been party to them. I can't talk about them because they're closed for national security reasons. So in states like ours, you still have that accountability.
But they only go so high, right?
But Israel, I'll come back to that. Israel doesn't have that accountability structure. So you have complete impunity for Israeli IDF soldiers, complete impunity for Israeli commanders, complete impunity for the political class in Israel. Our government, members of our government, are still meeting with Netanyahu and Gallant and generals where there is clear suspicion of war crimes. That is complicity, that is cover, and that is, in my view, potentially a war crime in itself. Now, this is the reason why Gaza has impacted on people, because it is so clear this time what is happening and the role that our own countries are playing in it. You see the videos. I mean, some of the videos, I tend not to look at them anymore because I've seen so much of this evidence over the last 18 months. But you see, you're scrolling on your timeline and suddenly pops up a picture of a headless child being carried by a father and somebody kneeling over that child crying. Yeah, we can see this. You wouldn't put this in horror films, but we see it on our social media, which is also being suppressed now, right? And then you see no response to that. You don't see any condemnation to that. You don't see anybody even talking about it from the top level, as you say. And there you have a reaction because, like I said to you, there is an anger in our societies. There's an anger against this system of impunity, this system of a lack of accountability. And it boils down from that all the way down to where you find it hard to buy bread, you find it hard to buy food, you see people driving around in flash cars and you're wondering how they are and you're not. And so your common person is sensing something is wrong. That anger is what you're seeing. So when, Gaza is not a Muslim problem or a Palestinian problem, people in the UK that recognize that there is a breakdown in the system, that recognize there is protection for certain classes of people, but not for themselves. If their kid is driving too fast down the motorway, they're going to get prosecuted, but somebody's allowed to blow someone's head off and nothing happens. That's a problem. We talk about this two-tier system. People recognize this. It does exist in some degrees and in some ways. And so you get this reaction, and that's why Gaza has impacted on people. And it's you can only take so much. You've got Afghanistan, you've got Iraq, you've got Gaza now, and people are recognizing it. Not just Muslims, but people are recognizing it. And your question about accountability doesn't go right to the top. I accept that, and there is something that we can do about that, and something that we haven't done in the past. The confidence that gave the American diplomat the ability to look me in the face and say, "You will forget," because of your comfort and your need for comfort, which allowed us to do Iraq and is allowing us to support the attacks in Gaza. Those aren't his words. Those were my addition to what he meant. Means that our political class in the UK, Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary, Home Secretary, Ministry of Defence, they have this comfort. I can do my stint. I can do what I like in my stint, and accountability won't come to me because it never does, right? But, on small things, it has come to senior people. It came to Rishi Sunak in the COVID issue. It came to Boris Johnson in the COVID issue. It came to Rishi Sunak for not wearing a seatbelt, right? Now that shows that these people are not automatically immune from criminal allegations. And that's a good test. That's a good test. But the good question is, well, why are not war crimes and war crimes complicity attaching themselves to these individuals? And that's something that we decided at ICJP was also very important, an important question. And that's why, using our primary sourced evidence of war crimes in Gaza, we submitted a complaint against 5 British ministers and officials for a criminal act in relation to war crimes in Gaza. And that's really important because it's down to us, the people, in the way we vote, in the way that we behave, in the legal actions we support and we engage in, as to whether or not the person at the top is going to be held accountable or not. And I've pledged, as director of the ICJP, as a lawyer, as a British patriot, British citizen, that I will not let the political class act and destroy British values and our relationship to international law and principles of justice. So these politicians that are engaging in these war crimes, our criminal complaint will follow them whilst they're in office and when they're out of office. And we will not let them forget, because we will seek accountability for what they're doing and what they have done until we can't, in other words, until they're not around anymore. But we will not let them forget this. And that's a pledge. And so just because they finish their term in office, which is in the past is what we've done, right? They finish their, okay, you can go off with your banking job now. You can go off and suddenly grow a conscience and start talking about, international law and human rights because you've got nothing else better to do because that's all you really are about now. Well, that's not going to work anymore. We're not going to let that happen. We are, and many others have built a database that we're taking receipts. You've said something, it will follow you around. And it'll follow you around for the rest of your life and the rest of your career. So think very carefully while you're in political office, because you won't always be in political office.
Obviously, you guys do a lot of great work at ICJP, and I want to get onto that. But I'd like to maybe take a step back and talk about yourself and your interest in law and all the work that you've done. Where did that start for you? Was it something like, you're trying to do what your parents wanted you to do, going into a law degree, or is that something you had a passion for growing up?
No, I mean, I wasn't raised particularly politically or particularly religiously, actually. And my journey to where I am now starts in my college A-level time, when I was studying A-levels in sciences and maths, which I dropped really quickly, maths, because it's too hard, right? I don't like maths, don't like numbers. But I during my time in college, I was chair of the charity committee, and we were raising money in the 90s for children war victims abroad. It wasn't because I was particularly political. I didn't really understand. I'll be completely honest. I didn't really understand what we were raising money for. It was just children in need, and there were these kids abroad in Bosnia and places like that were victims of war, so we were raising money for them. And in raising that money, in trying to raise that money, where I was wearing a gorilla suit running around the town centre with a bucket getting money in. We raised quite a lot of money. But some parents of children or other college students started to complain about the fact that we were sending money to foreigners, children in foreign countries. And I didn't get that. I was like, what the hell, right? I was like, well, and I remember being called into the head's office, who gave me the decision as to what to do with the money. So it's your problem because you're in charge. I'm not going to tell you what to do. And that was really eye-opening for me, and I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. The only sort of racism I'd had up to that point was one kid saying to me, I can annoy you by saying 2 words to you. And I was like, what? And he said NF to me. And I was like, that doesn't annoy me, because I didn't know what it meant. So I went home, about 14, 15. I said, Dad, what does NF mean? And he said, he explained it to me, and I was like, all right, okay. But it didn't bother me because it wasn't real for me. I was lucky, very, very lucky, and that's how I grew up. A few incidents of racism, nothing really to write home about, okay? But that one thing made me look into why those people would object to sending money to people abroad. And we see a lot of that resonate in today's world, the anti-migrant sentiment, the anti-Muslim sentiment. But that led me on a journey to learn about World War II, actually, because I recognized in conflicts, in studying conflicts, that the sentiment that was at the sort of seed stage in my college by these parents that were objecting quite vocally and making complaints and making my life difficult, that's similar to the sentiment that was incubated in Nazi Germany at the beginning. And it just grew and it was allowed to fester. And I didn't like it one bit. And that set me on my political and legal journey, in that I wanted to engage in that process to eliminate that sentiment in people, to work against that view that people might have, that I can't help you because you look different, I can't help you because you have a different religion, I can't help you because I just don't like you because I'm being told not to like you. And I've already said to you about the impact that World War II had on me. And it did. It was looking at those numbers and realizing what had happened and saying, well, look, how do I engage with this? I thought, you know what? I need to be a politician. I need to be the prime minister. I mean, I really did think that at one point, right? I was a kid, so excuse that. Aim high. And so I changed my A-levels and I took up English language and I dropped physics, which is also uses a lot of numbers and I don't like it. And I did that in order to, my decision was that to become a good politician, I needed to become a good lawyer, because it would give me all the skills I needed to become an advocate, to speak, to understand, to analyze, to become analytical. It seemed like a good pathway. And as I did that, as I went into that process, with the ambition of being a politician, and I really did, by the way. I mean, I wrote it down. I had a 10-point plan. This is what I'm going to do. I thought, well, criminal law was what I wanted to do, and I wanted to become a lawyer first. On the pathway, after I qualified, still with the ambition of becoming a politician, and starting to speak to politicians and know politicians and support politicians and engaging in the Labour Party, but also with the Conservatives and also with the Liberal Democrats, because I have good relationships with all three parties, or I had good relationships with all three parties. I have good relationships with MPs from all three parties. I'd noticed something about politicians, which is that they are restricted in what they can do and say. And I didn't like that. And so they have to abide by their party policy, their party whip, some political advantage. So when they need to say something, quite often, they won't. And it develops another phenomenon, which is that after they finish their political office, suddenly they become massive humanitarians. Oh my God, look at all these things that are going. They run around the world banging a big drum about all the things that are wrong. But when they were in office, they did nothing about it, because they were waiting to get themselves into a politically advantageous position to do something about it. And I decided I couldn't be part of that establishment. In fact, a couple of times when I was asked to do a speech in my early days in Parliament to get to know more politicians, that was the purpose behind it, I lost my temper a few times and I chastised MPs for making comments in front of me. And I remember one very senior person within the political establishment, who I won't name, who said to me, Ty, you've got to be, if you want to be a politician, you've got to be a bit more smooth than that. And I thought, you know what, screw that. I don't want to be more smooth than that. That's not for me. I don't want to be put in a position where then I'm restricted in what I can say or what I need to say because somebody threatens to pull the party whip, or somebody tells me I can't be a member of that political party, or it's outside the policy of the party. And I decided at that point that I'm going to remain as a lawyer, because as a lawyer, I can say what my clients need me to say for them, so I can advocate them, I can amplify them. But as a lawyer, I'm free to say what I like. I'm free to talk about the rules of the rule of law and the principles of justice. I'm free, even more so, to hold politicians accountable when they fail. And I found something quite unique, that in the position that I've now got as a senior lawyer in Bindmans, and as director of the ICJP, my exposure to politicians in the UK is pretty phenomenal, but also across the globe. In the last 18 months, I have, along with members of my team at ICJP, lobbied around 50 countries now on international law, briefed them from head of state level all the way to Minister of Justice, Foreign Minister, and ambassador, mostly ambassadors. So we've including in the United States, by the way, not just in states that we want to persuade, everybody we've engaged with. And I found that this ability to hold politicians accountable in private is much more important to me than being a politician, not living up to my principles and not living up to knowing what is right and wrong, and then doing something which I think I'll fix later on. That doesn't work for me anymore. And so what I found in this process is that, we've even briefed, or I've even briefed foreign governments at quite a high level. And when I've taken litigation out sometimes on a foreign government, which I've done quite a lot, or issued some sort of letter to them. Or on one occasion, I got a phone call from a very senior foreign diplomat who said to me, "But hang on a minute, you were advising us a few weeks ago. Like, this is not a formal relationship. You were advising us on international law and briefing us on the situation in the Middle East. Why are you litigating against us? I thought we were friends." And my response to him was something that I couldn't do as a politician, or I don't think I could do as a politician. I am your friend, and holding you accountable and holding your country accountable is being your friend. And what I found, I mean, it was a good conversation. What I found is, to my surprise, is that's generated a lot of respect from foreign politicians. And what we might think, they might break relations with me because of that. Telling them that I'm not going to do them a favor because we have a relationship, we're going to hold them accountable to a legal standard that is plain and clear and in the treaty they signed, right, and they claim to abide by, actually builds respect, and it doesn't break the relationship. And I think that where I am right now, doing this is in this climate that we're in right now, is much more important than being a politician. For me, that is, for me. I mean, I'm clear that there are politicians that do really important work, put their political career on the line, as we've seen quite a lot in recent days. But for me, this is where I've decided to stay.
You remind me of a hadith of the Prophet, ﷺ. The rough translation, it's not a great translation, but he says, support your brother if he's oppressed or if he is an oppressor. And so the companions ask him, well, how do we know how to support him if he's oppressed? How do we support him if he's an oppressor? If he's an oppressor, if he's oppressed, then you lift the oppression off him. And if he's an oppressor, then you stop him from oppressing. And so what you said there kind of reminded me of that. I thought it was kind of beautiful the way you put it. You do a lot of great work with ICJP, the International Centre for Justice for Palestinians. And it was actually founded before the ongoing genocide in Gaza. How has the work shifted? You know, how was the work before the 7th of October, and how's that shifted into what you guys are doing?
Well, in some ways it's shifted, in some ways it hasn't. I mean, it's intensified, that's for sure, right? But what I want to say about ICJP is really important. ICJP is an organisation that I set up as a result of work that I had done all the way back in 2009 when we applied for an arrest warrant for Zippy Livni, and successfully applied for an arrest warrant for Zippy Livni. And for people that don't know, Zippy Livni was the former foreign minister of Israel, who was a member of the war cabinet that made a decision to bomb with the military a civilian police station in Gaza. And that was a war crime, very clearly a war crime. And we applied for an arrest warrant based on primary evidence that we had gathered for that application, and we were successful in getting that. And that led to creating an organization that would deal with Palestine and Israel within the framework, or through the lens of the law, if you like. And so I put together a website in my bedroom, and then showed people it, and people were saying, "Oh, this is great, it's brilliant." They say, "Oh, how do we get?" I said, "It doesn't exist, it's just an idea." But that had buy-in, and people started to buy into that idea. And that's where the idea came from. But the thing that's really important about ICJP is that it's grown from that tiny little idea into quite a large organisation with a significant number of people in it. And the strength of ICJP is actually the individuals that are in it. I mean, I would class these people as my heroes, because they're brave, they're smart, and they're committed. And it would be nothing without these people. And that's something I'm really honoured to be part of. I'm really honoured to be part of it. And they should be recognised. I mean, they do the most brave things in terms of their work. Some of them are Palestinians, and some of them find it doubly difficult because they know the streets that have been bombed, they know the people that have been killed, they know the places. It's not a story to them. It's not something that's, like for me, being done my phone, or something that I know because I'm speaking to witnesses. It's personal for some of those people. They're actually from there, right? And their family there, and that's quite difficult for them, and that's why they're brave, and that's why they're my heroes, because despite that, they decided to pick up the pen, They decided to engage in the law, knowing how futile it has been, and are pushing that because they think that's the right way, not violence. And that's really important. So it intensified because on October the 9th, very closely after October the 7th, should we just say something really important about October the 7th, which is ICJP's position on October the 7th is that if Palestinians did something that was a violation of international law on October the 7th, they are just as culpable and susceptible to accountability as if an Israeli did. There is no separation in that. There is an important lack of understanding in this, in the work that I do and the position I take, in that our work is about application of the rule of law and justice equally to Palestinians and Israelis. That does not mean that Palestinians have to accept their fate because Palestinians have the right to resist occupation. That has to be done lawfully. Now, I'm not passing judgment on what's happening in each particular incident in this conversation, in the same way as when I talk about Israeli allegations, I talk about allegations, I talk about suspects, because you only can talk about that person being a war criminal after judgment's been made on them, and that's really important. And there would be no point in being an advocate of the rule of law if I'm sitting here as judge, jury, and executioner, effectively, on Palestinians or Israelis. But the biggest single problem is the asymmetrical relationship between Palestinians and Israelis, the misapplication of the rule of law and principles of justice, and the occupation of Palestine. Really clear about that. So, and the reason why I bring this context into this is because October the 7th wasn't the first time that something happened in that region. We had decades and decades of violations of international law by Israel against the Palestinians. And we had, proof of that is really simply the arrest warrant we got in 2009, 2014. We have incursions into the West Bank, into Gaza. We have settlement building. We now know that by international law judgments at the ICJ that these are illegal, right? The occupation is illegal. Annexation of Palestinian land is illegal. Acts of apartheid perpetrated against the Palestinians. But coming back to your question, we knew by October the 9th what Israel would do because of its antecedents, its track record, its participation in war crimes previously. We'd already been looking at war crimes. We'd already been submitting evidence to the ICC. We'd already been making these complaints anyway. But we decided that we could not trust governments and we could not trust international institutions to do their jobs properly. And so we engaged from October the 9th on a evidence gathering exercise, which we continue to this day, but has resulted in probably the biggest volume of evidence of this type that's available anywhere in the world. We now have 140 eyewitness accounts of what has happened in Gaza over the last 18 months. And these are from medical professionals that have been in and out of the country giving aid, but most significantly, injured Palestinians who are receiving treatment in refugee camps at the moment. And there is about a volume of about 80 of those. And we decided to collect this evidence to a British criminal legal standard. And what that meant was that using the procedure that Scotland Yard had done, I'm a criminal defence lawyer by training, and I defend allegations. That's my day job, if you like. But I also conduct private prosecutions from time to time and prepare complaints for the police from time to time. So we already had the skill set to do this. And so we managed to collect this evidence, which tells a phenomenal narrative of war crimes. And we did that in something we call the Justice for Gaza campaign. It was really important. And it was so powerful that when we engaged with Scotland Yard and we submitted evidence to Scotland Yard, we had a couple of detectives from Scotland Yard contact us and say, we like and heard about the work that you're doing. Can we work with you? And of course, they can't work with Scotland Yard and us at the same time, but we interviewed these individuals and we recruited one. in particular. And so we have a former Scotland Yard police detective, a Metropolitan Police detective, who now works with us full-time in our investigation unit. And you can imagine the boon that gives to us and the support that gives to us in making sure that the evidence we gather is gathered in a way that is going to be usable and credible for court. And that's how we started that project, and that's what we did. And of course, we now have moved into the Global 195 aspect of the work that we do.
What is the Global 195?
So as we progressed and we saw that our evidence was being used successfully in places like by people like the South African legal team, by the ICC. Of course, they've got other evidence available to them as well, but some of our evidence was provided to them. We saw that our evidence was formulating complaints domestically against British ministers and individuals here. Then we saw an amazing breakthrough in that the ICC issued arrest warrants. Great, it was amazing. Then we saw the sanctions. And then we realized that actually relying on the ICC alone was dangerous, not necessarily because of the ICC's own actions, but because of what the rest of the world might do to it and might do to its staff. And so we decided that we had an obligation, because we'd collected this evidence. And by the way, this evidence is heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking if you sit and read it and look at it. We had an obligation to the people that were brave enough to speak to us, that risked their lives in going in and out of Gaza to give medical aid, and then had given us their testimony. We had an obligation to these people to not just collect evidence and stick it in some sort of archive for future generations to look at and read and say, oh yeah, it was really bad, wasn't it? But nobody did anything about it. And we wanted that obligation of ours to mean that the brave step that these witnesses had taken and these victims had taken would result in some sort of action. And we've talked a lot about, in this discussion that we've had, about the futility of international law, the dysfunction of the international law. And so we decided that we would try to do what law enforcement agencies across the globe were supposed to do and failing to do. And so what we decided to do was to put together a legal team called Global 195. 195 because there are 195 countries in the world. And our objective is to have a legal team alive and active in every single country in the world, including in Israel, including in Palestine. And for those legal teams to receive our evidence along with criminal complaints about the general systematic policy-based war crimes alleged against Israel, so that those law enforcement agencies can take up that complaint and prosecute anybody from Netanyahu and the political class through to the military class down to individual IDF soldiers. That's step one. And we launched that with a significant number of countries that had worked on complaints in their jurisdictions and supplied them to their police forces. And then the second aspect of this is that because of political pressure, and we talked about the political pressure in terms of politicians and where they are, we would take the law into our own hands. And what that means is that where we could, and you can't do this in every jurisdiction, but you can in many, we would apply for private arrest warrants for individuals that we have identified as committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, or potentially acts of genocide in Gaza and potentially now the West Bank too. And what that means is that we prepare a case, we go to a magistrate's court, we ask for an arrest warrant. That arrest warrant translates into an obligation for a police agency or a police force to arrest that individual. And then we will prosecute them if the state fails to prosecute them. And that network of civilian-based civil society, non-governmental organizations, individual lawyers across the globe presents a different track to the institutional failures that we're seeing. Not necessarily because the institutions are failing, but because the pressure being put on them to provide accountability. And your next question, will it work? Yes, it will work. It worked in 2009 against Zippy Livni. I will tell you this. My discussions with the states that I've had, there are some states that want to have their place in history in the right way. Not on the right side, in the right way. And in the right way means understanding the rule of law, understanding the principles of justice, understanding what the spiral of violence looks like, understanding what impunity is, and withstanding all of that to the degree that they will act on the evidence that we supply them to prosecute individuals. And so in ICJP now we have an intelligence unit that gathers information about individuals that may have engaged in war crimes from the top to the very bottom in terms of rank. They collate evidence of allegations, puts that to our legal team, and our legal team drafts complaints and potential arrest warrant applications, and that then will translate into hopefully at some point a prosecution.
I'd like to ask you about a few legal developments. We don't have much time left to film, so kind of like a quick fire round, if you will.
Yeah.
This is something that's quite close to what you're doing in Global 195 in terms of going after individuals. Recently, a group of lawyers accused 10 Britons of committing war crimes in Israel. Were you connected to this development by any chance, and kind of what thoughts do you have on it?
We're not connected to them. The work they're doing is good. We support in terms of not material support, but we support the work they're doing. They're an independent group. They've done great work. It's very important work. More power to them. What do I think of that? I think it's crucial, and it's part of. It's not part of Global 195 formally, but it's part of our ethos, our principles. It fits within that framework. We want there to be hundreds, if not thousands, of groups and organizations and individuals that are doing what they did across the globe. And we will offer them support, evidence, in order to speed up what they're doing. But for me, the more groups that do this, the quicker we'll get to a position of accountability at some point. What will be very interesting is whether the police action this. That will be very interesting to see.
Going to other war criminals, Netanyahu. Well, you said you wouldn't call him a war criminal until he's
suspected war criminal.
He's
Wanted war criminal.
Wanted war criminal. International fugitive Netanyahu arrived in Hungary recently. He was received by the Hungarian premier, and he then flew to the United States over the airspace of several Rome Statute signing countries like France and Italy. What do you think that means for international law?
Well, I think it's very sad that Hungary took the position that it took and protected a war criminal. And that's what they did. There's no two ways to look at it, right? This is a wanted war criminal, and Hungary protected them. And it's probably right that Hungary removed itself from the Rome Statute if it wasn't prepared to abide by it. Let's hope Hungary doesn't find itself in the crosshairs of a war criminal targeting them at some time in the future, because what they're doing by removing themselves from the Rome Statute is weakening the framework of international humanitarian law, which increases the likelihood of states taking illegal action in the context of alleged or purported warfare. So it's very sad that they've done that. It's not surprising, looking at Viktor Orban, that he's done that. And what I will say to you is that we contacted people on the ground in Hungary in order to support legal work, and we had some progress with that. But isn't this interesting that Hungary itself, or these individuals in Hungary, were too frightened, although they were working with us and on our legal work, were too frightened to put their names to it because they feared repercussions from the Hungarian government. What does that tell you about that state and the way it represses its people? So this is what Hungary has done, is part of a larger movement away from democracy and a dismantlement of their democratic principles and processes. And the rest of Europe needs to look at Hungary and decide whether or not actually this step and other steps, repressive steps they've made against their own people, is an indicator that it is no longer in that club. Or does this club now have different rules altogether? They're flying over airspace. I mean, whilst I'd love France to scramble its jets and force the jet to land, that's not. I don't suspect that would happen or is likely to happen. What's more important than that is that if Netanyahu lands in a Rome Statute country, or any country, even a non-Rome Statute country, he should be arrested and prosecuted.
He must have been comfortable and confident that if he was to have an emergency landing in either of those countries, that neither of them would abide by the ICC.
I don't think that follows. I don't think it follows that if Netanyahu ends up in a Rome Statute country like the United Kingdom or France, that he won't be arrested and prosecuted. I think if he felt that confident about that, he would have gone there already. But I welcome him. Come to the UK. Let's see what happens.
Several European leaders have said that they wouldn't arrest him, though, right?
And they'll be challenged in court. So when this happened in Poland, and the Polish government announced that it was prepared to protect him if he came to Poland, a legal team scrambled through Global 195 in Poland and issued documents to the government effectively warning them that if he landed in Poland, the legal team would initiate legal proceedings in order to prevent him from escaping and in order to review the government's decision about whether or not he should be arrested. And that's the same everywhere else. We're ready in the UK. If Keir Starmer's government decides to protect a war criminal, he will find himself rapidly in court. And we will also, or the decision maker will find themselves rapidly in court, and will also apply for a High Court injunction preventing the suspected war criminal from leaving the jurisdiction while we decide on what's right and what's wrong. Because whatever lobbyists and lawyers are saying about immunity, a sitting head of state, including Netanyahu, does not have immunity from the Rome Statute.
Are there any consequences for a country like Hungary leaving the ICC?
There can be consequences, but it depends on the other states and whether or not they decide, in terms of the member states, whether they decide on taking that action, like, for example, sanctions and things like that. But, I don't expect anybody to do that. There should be consequences for them. Are there likely to be consequences in this fragile geopolitical situation we have with Russia on one side, Israel on the other side, the United States with a car that appears to have a driver but not quite sure what direction is driving in at any given moment in time, either President Trump. I think states are going to be quite cautious at the moment about what they do.
Recently, Hamas, the Islamic resistance movement, who are proscribed by the UK and the US, several other European and Western-friendly nations, have instructed lawyers to challenge the decision by the United Kingdom to proscribe the political wing of the resistance group. My question to you is, how is something like that possible, considering their prescription, and is it likely to succeed?
Okay, so likely to succeed is a question that I can't answer, because it depends, first of all, on the Secretary of State's decision-making, and then what's called the Proscribed Organisations Appeal Commission, which is a court which is constituted differently to a normal court because national security is always discussed in it, for them to decide on whether or not they should deprescribe this organisation based on effectively judicial review principles and reviewing the Secretary of State's decision. Not quite as straightforward as that, but that's the way that works. It'll be a long process, that's for sure. It will be a difficult process, that's for sure. But you know what I find the most interesting about this whole issue is that you have so Hamas is a proscribed terrorist organisation. There's no doubt about that. There's no question. It's a fact. The United Kingdom has proscribed it as a terrorist organisation. That brings certain obligations on people in the UK. You can't support it. You can't fund it. You can't champion it. You can't be a member of it. You can't wear its paraphernalia, its insignia. All of those things are a criminal offence in the UK. I don't know if I said you can't fund it. I think I mentioned that. And so you got this organisation, which is, wherever you say about it, it arrives in Palestine in the context of Palestinian resistance against occupation. It has methodology and tactics which can be looked at and examined and criticised within the context and framework of the rule of law. When it does something illegal, it's illegal. When it does something that's not illegal, it's not illegal. What the UK decided was that the actions it had done met the prescription requirement under the Terrorism Act 2000. Now, you asked, how can a legal team work with that organisation? Section 10 of the Terrorism Act 2000 allows an immunity for prescribed organisations to do acts with a view to deprescription. And it allows anybody that's working alongside that organisation or with that organisation, including lawyers, to be immune from prosecution in that context as well. And so it makes sense because, the Terrorism Act, the prescription is a legal framework. But within the Terrorism Act, there is a legal framework allowing you to challenge that if you feel that or you think that that prescription was unfair or outside the rules. Now, what I find the most astounding about this is that, it might be a terrorist organization. It might not be in someone's mind. That's one thing. But what are they doing? Right? You can criticize an organization, a terrorist organization, as much as you like when you consider the action it does a terrorist. You can point them out. You can say, look what they're doing. This is terrible. This is disgraceful. They should be prosecuted for this. But when they take the battle to the courtroom, why is that a problem? What is it about an organization saying, oh, look, you've prescribed me. Your law has a framework for me to challenge that, and I want to challenge it. I want you to review that decision. Why, as a principal position, is that something that they shouldn't be allowed to do? That's a dangerous position to take, because what you're saying is that some people that we don't like, or that some people don't like, shouldn't have recourse to law. Now, I don't agree with that in any way at all. Everybody, regardless of who they are, should have recourse to law and a fair trial. It's nothing to do with the European Court of Human Rights, because I'll tell you what, if you start to take... It's okay for the Secretary of State to say, hey, guess what, I don't agree with you, no problem. It's okay for POAC to say, listen, I don't agree with you, we're going to keep you banned. That's fine, that's a judgment. That's what the framework allows it to do. That's where I think every battle should be fought, frankly. Not on the battlefield, right? Not on social media, in a courtroom. Let's have the battle in a courtroom. Let's do it where people are safe. Let's do it where arguments can be heard. Let's do it where you can remove propaganda and bias. Is the reason that people are frightened of the Hamas deprescription application is because they think that they might win the application? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think some really important arguments are going to be litigated through that process. Whether or not it's going to be successful ultimately or not is a different issue. But I certainly would rather, any day of the week, have Hamas apply for deprescription in a British court, have Hamas prosecuted for war crimes in the ICC, any day of the week, rather than giving bombs and weapons and guns to people and blowing the hell out of an entire state, Gaza, Palestine, with the view of killing everybody in that organization. Prosecute them.
On a final note, the genocide in Israel has been enabled by states across the West, namely the US, with their billions of dollars in support and military equipment and bombs that have, as you said, destroyed the Gaza Strip and Gaza. And Germany, similarly, provide them with many weapons. And in the UK, providing them with intelligence. We know that frequently spy planes are leaving Akrotiri, the base in Cyprus, to fly over Gaza. We don't know what's going on there. So a lot of Western leaders and Western state apparatus are implicated in the genocide that's going on in Gaza. Are we going to see any Western leaders in The Hague?
Well, it's going to be difficult. There's no doubt about that, because West does not want to set precedents of Western leaders being prosecuted for war crimes. But I think if you asked any leader of any state anywhere in the world that has been prosecuted for war crimes and convicted, and there have been many, whether they thought that when they were in power they would be immune from prosecution, I think the answer they would give is yes. They think they would be, but they weren't. And I think the way that Western leaders will be prosecuted for war crimes is eventually, and when the people of these states decide that, enough is enough, right? We don't want our legacy, our values, to be enshrined in the blood of the innocent in violation of rules that we help create for the purpose of enriching other people. I think there is suddenly a real possibility that Western leaders at some point, maybe not today, maybe not while they're in office, will be prosecuted for war crimes, and maybe not in The Hague. The global south is rising, and maybe in a new Hague, in a different part of the world.
Tayab Ali, thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for giving us your time today, and I wish you all the best.
Thanks very much.
If you found this conversation engaging, please do leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching.